Matthew 24, starting at verse 37. This is the Living Bible. The world will be at ease, banquets and parties and weddings, just as it was in Noah's time before the sudden coming of the flood. People wouldn't believe what was going to happen until the flood actually arrived and took them all away. So shall my coming be. 2 men will be working together in the fields, and one will be taken, the other left. 2 women will be going about their household tasks. One will be taken, the other left. So be prepared, for you don't know what day your Lord is coming. And Joshua 1:9, yes, be bold and strong. Banish fear and doubt. For remember, the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So, it's going to get worse before it gets better. But we don't have to be afraid. All right.
Oh, is that it?
That's it for me today.
But just so you know, this timeline is, I had introduced that a couple of weeks ago, and it's a timeline that myself and some friends of mine and all kind of developed using different prophecies, putting it together. And I'm not saying that this timeline is, you know, completely accurate down to the day or whatever I think it is, but but I keep changing it as things happen, and you have to just keep, I call it progressive revelation, because you think you know one thing, then something will happen one week, and you got to adjust to it and try to figure out, you know, the next thing, which is why I've been called like, because of the misinformation, because I'll say one thing and then but it's not meant to be set in stone. But, you know, people have a hard time understanding that. Well, you changed that. Last time you said,
Prophecy interprets itself as events unfold.
right, and that's why it's progressive, and,
Right.
and you have to adjust to that. So, well, if you want to just take a look at it now, I'll just go over it briefly, because as we go down through, I want to really start talking about the events in it. Stephen, you want one?
Sure.
And I want to bring these couple other prophecies to you tonight, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I wanted you to have it so you could look it over. I got to find out when a Jubilee year started, according to the modern history, not like Old Testament. I went to an Israeli government site. So it started off with, it went back before even 1866, but it was kind of irrelevant to what I wanted to bring forth. So I started with a Jubilee starting in 1866-67, which was the Sabbath year belonging to the previous cycle. And then in 1867 to 1868, it was the first year in the cycle of it was a Jubilee year, according to the Israeli government. Now, you got to keep in mind the Jubilee year has not been kept. If there's a rabbinical law that says if we're not in the land, of course they can't keep the Sabbath, and they can't. And if they don't keep the Sabbath, then they're not going to be able to keep the Jubilee.
Yeah.
But there is a timeline that goes back that you can count Jubilees, but it's just for the modern part of it. I started with what the government said was a Jubilee year, and lo and behold, it worked out. I just started with that, and then I built upon that. So look, just going down through that, you'll see 1867 to 68 was a Jubilee year. Now the way I did it is I came down because our year overlaps the Jewish year. That's why you'll see it from 68 to 69, 69 to 70. If you just start naming a year, you get all confused, at least I do, because you don't know whether you're talking about still in our year or the Jewish year that's already begun. So if you look at it with this overlap, it's a lot easier. And then you can start counting the Sabbath cycles. So I tried to make it as simple as I could with the first year in the new cycle, second year, and it's kind of elementary, but I kept coming down till you get to the 7th year, and there you go, Sabbath year belonging to the previous cycle. Now that 1 is counting the cycles until we get to a jubilee again. So you'll see that 1, 2, 3, 4 on the first page. That's helping you keep track of how many cycles there have been until we get to the next jubilee year. You get that? I mean, did I do that clear enough? Okay, so then on the next page, it's coming down through the 1900s. Sabbath year belonging to the previous cycle, the 5th cycle, the 6th cycle. And in 1908, 1909 is when there's always been a Jewish presence over there in Israel, but this was when the first kibbutz was found in that year.
What's
And
a
also,
kibbutz?
A kibbutz is like,
A commune.
it's actually, yeah, commune as in communist. When they went over, they had nothing. When they made Aliyah, when they went into the land, they had nothing, and everything was desolate. It was swampland. It was just nothing there. And they went in there as groups, and they wanted to drain the swamps. And I mean, within 70 years, they have made the whole land blossom again.
Well, it's kind of like the Dead Sea, right? Dead Sea Scrolls in that area, they have kibbutz like.
Well, there's kibbutzim
The
all
kibbutzim
over the
all over
country.
the place,
What they were is they would get together like a commune, and everything belonged to the commune. That's why it was communist. Some of the guides didn't like to talk about it over there when we asked questions because of the communist view of it, that everything belonged to everyone. And in
But
fact,
you know, if everyone has the right heart and everyone has a good work ethic and shares, communism as small communities works. The
Ideologically.
word communism sounds so nasty to us, but that's
Right.
because we understand it as a political system that doesn't work.
Right.
But in its pure form, a commune is not a bad thing. I mean, if the people within it all work together.
but they did it out of necessity. They had nothing, they shared everything. And that's, everyone pulled their load, or pulled their share and everything. Now today, there's less than 250 kibbutzim over there, but now they're like bedroom communities. When the kibbutz, it was self-contained. They lived on the kibbutz, they all cooked in a common kitchen, they all shared everything, but they worked right there in that area. Today, it's almost like a bedroom community. Most of the kibbutz, the people go out and work, and now they've changed it even because I stayed at one. They only give a percentage of their paychecks to the kibbutz, and that way they can still keep the kibbutz. It's almost like your what's it called when you have the condos association fee? It's almost like that now, because they all have come around to the point where, yeah, but I'm earning this money and I need it for my, so the mentality of we've got to get in there and drain these swamps and plant crops and plant trees and stuff, that was the focus. Now the focus is you're making your living, you're living on the kibbutz, you're sharing things to a certain extent. But Golda Meir, when she was, this shows you the mentality. When Golda Meir was the prime minister, right before she was, her husband wanted to live on a kibbutz. And when they moved on the kibbutz, she was against it. She didn't want to do it. When she lived on the kibbutz, she lasted, it was either 2 or 3 years. And then she told her husband, I'm going. Whether you want to go with me or not, I'm not living on this kibbutz anymore. And he said, why? And she said, because I'm tired of sitting, looking out the window and seeing that woman going down the street in my dress. That's actually how they lived then. They shared clothing even. So, and Golda Meir, the Prime Minister of Israel, said, I don't like having to see my dresses walking down the street. So the first kibbutz was founded, and that's when they started to try to bring the land back. And I mean,
Yeah, can you imagine if they hadn't have done that?
right,
Would have never brought the land back. So, yeah.
no. And Tel Aviv was founded. But if you were in Tel Aviv, you wouldn't know you're not in New York City, because that's what it looks like today. They even have twin towers. They're not as big as what we had, but there's two big brown buildings there, and they call that their twin towers. It's very, very modern. I don't like it, because to me, it's just like being in another city.
Right.
Jerusalem is all, there's no other place on earth like Jerusalem. Everything has to be by law faced with stone, the Jerusalem stone. If they build a wall along the road, it has to face it with stone. If they build a building, it has to face it with stone. Everything is stone, and it's gorgeous. So then, you're coming down and through the Sabbath cycles. When you get to 1917, 1918, if you look right above that at the Sabbath year, that's the seventh Sabbath cycle. That's your 49 years. So the 50th year is the Jubilee. Now, there's also an opinion with some rabbis that the 49th year is the Jubilee year. But it's clearly, I don't think I wrote it down on here, but clearly God said, you shall hallow the 50th year. And they give all kind of reasons why it's the 49th year, but based on the crops and, well, they would have had to go an extra year without planting and all that. But that doesn't matter. God said, you shall hallow the 50th year.
Yeah.
So, and in that Jubilee, you'll see the Balfour Declaration. I'm going to let you read it later on. But the significant thing was General Allenby captured Jerusalem from the Turks. So they reclaimed Jerusalem. If you flip over to page 4, in the next Jubilee, you'll see what happened in 66, 67. Israel captured Jerusalem again in the 6-day war. So every Jubilee, those two Jubilees were, they got Jerusalem back. That's significant. That's prophetic.
Yeah.
If you go back to page 3, I'll explain in 1945 to 46, the first year in the next cycle, it says begins the 70-year countdown. Now this is my doing. Okay, this is what I did to see how it was going to come out at the end. Why did I start in 45, 46 instead of 48 when Israel became a state? Because, number one, they have to be back in the land. Well, they were coming back in the land, although the state hadn't been declared yet. But because the post-World War II Holocaust message was clear, the only future for the Jewish survivors was to be found in their ancient homeland. Only in their own sovereign state would they be safe. So just as Moses had led the ancient Hebrews out of Egypt, the Zionist leadership was to take them out of Europe. And the birth of the Jewish nation for the second time was at hand. And that's the year World War II ended. Now, this might not seem significant if you just look at that by itself, to start counting why 70 years. Also, that's the year I was born. But you'll see as we go down through, if you flip back over, go past 4, go to 5, you'll see it come down to 1993, 94. That Sabbath year we talked about as being a rehearsal for the 70th week. And I found out something else about the 70th week when it begins that will knock your socks off, but we'll get to that. And the analogy I put on there for you to see, and keep coming, page 6, you'll see the first week of Jacob's trouble, and I started putting down like 63rd year of the 70th year, so you can count the number of years to 72. 2008-09, second week of Jacob's trouble. We talked a little bit about it. And on page 7, the next cycle that's coming, next Sabbath cycle that's coming up is going to be the 7th Shemitah, 49th year, and that will be the 70th year of 70 years for the beginning of the 70th week.
Wow.
And when I saw that,
That's
see, I
good.
didn't do this ahead. I just started with the first dates. And I thought, okay, World War II ends. It's not a state yet, but it's coming down to it because the Zionist organizations were already at work. And they were already making Aliyah from Russia and Poland and all this stuff. So they're coming in. But when the Holocaust ended, and they knew they had to give these people a place for a homeland after what they've been through, I thought, okay, I'm just going to plug this in here because they're coming back in the land. And this is how it worked out. Not 70 years for the second coming. Like a lot of people have developed timelines that I have looked at, and we've talked about it, and they kept saying, no, it's at the end of 70 years, Jesus will be back. That's the second coming. And I kept thinking, I don't understand that, because 70, here's what got me. 70 years, Jubilee year, what is being released? What is...
Debt.
Okay, a Jubilee year, you release debt, indentured servants are set free, no longer, having to, everything reverts to its owner, to the original owner. Just like when Jesus comes back, second coming, creation, the whole earth is going to revert back to its rightful owner, the Creator. What is going to be set free in 70 years? What's going to be redeemed? Where our redemption is going to be shown to be established? The rapture. 70 years is our release. Because even though the church and Israel are separate on God's timeline, as far as He's got to finish out the 70th week for Israel. In the 70th year, we have our release. I'm hoping. That's how I'm looking at it. But in the 70th year, at the same time that 70th year ends, and we have our Jubilee of being released, the church gone, the Jubilee stands for redemption. The Jubilee 70 years also stands for judgment. It's going to be redemption of the church to see their redemption. We have it now, but they will see it. It will be established then. And at the same exact time that the 70th week begins for Israel to finish out Daniel 9:27. Make an end of sins, make reconciliation for iniquity, to seal up the vision, to anoint the most holy. Those things haven't happened yet. And they can't happen right now because all these other things have to happen first. But in the 70th year, at the beginning of the 70th week, it's redemption and it's judgment. We're not appointed to wrath. God says you are not appointed to wrath. But Israel has to complete their 70th week. So I'm thinking that this arrived on time, 70 of 70 of 70. And the 70th week of Daniel begins. And then, well, lo and behold, look what happens. September 13th, 2015, that's when I'm thinking the resurrection rapture may happen during that new moon at the start of the 70th week. I'm not naming well, I named the date. Okay, that's it. I'm just so, I don't like to name the date because then everybody goes, well, wrong.
Yeah, you qualify it, that.
But this is my opinion,
There
so
you
I'll
go,
say
I
it,
like
okay? I'm thinking that The resurrection, rapture, the resurrection comes first, dead in Christ rise first during the new moon, before the start of the 70th week, because that's Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets, in a brand new cycle, 7 years, the 70th week.
Just real quick, go over that no one knows the day or the hour explanation real quick for the folks that weren't here last week.
Okay, when the disciples asked Jesus in Matthew 24, what shall be the sign of your coming? And how will these things be at the end? He said, no man knows the day or the hour. Well, in every church I've ever been in, they say you cannot make a prediction. Nobody knows. Nobody knows the day or the hour. That was an idiom. That was the same as us saying, you going to be at my house on Turkey Day? Are you going to come on Thanksgiving? I think so. The day that no man knows, the day and hour that no man knows, refers to the Feast of Trumpets. The Feast of Trumpets is a 2-day event. No one knows when the first sighting of the new moon is going to be. So you have to wait until somebody sees it. And by 2 or 3 witnesses it's established, and then they start relaying the information. The reason it takes 2 days is because back then they had no other way except word of mouth to go to tell them, we saw the new moon.
They didn't have our modern world satellite.
They didn't have NASA.
Right, so that whole 2-day event with not knowing when someone was going to arrive in your town is the same as how the rapture is. You don't quite know when it's going to be in your particular area. And with the time zones, you said how one's asleep and one's, 2 asleep or in the bed, and in this other time zone, 2 are in the fields together, whatever.
Well, that actually refers to it, the second coming, but I use that as a pattern to show as Jesus comes, lightning comes from east to west, how the time zones go around the world, starting at Jerusalem, going west. You see Jerusalem, the resurrection rapture happening in the morning. There's not going to be a whole lot of missing Messianic Jews over there amongst all of the Jews. And then as it in the same moment, in the twinkling of an eye, it's like midnight at the east coast of the United States, and only about 9 o'clock in the evening at the west coast. That's where the majority of Christians in the entire world are. God's mercy is that they're either home watching television or they're in bed already on the East Coast. And the things that are going to happen in the world, the accidents, the planes, the Christian pilots and planes and cars and trains and all that, there crashes, and it's going to be devastation. But God's mercy shows that in the country that has the most quantity of Christians, they're going to be safe. Not the Christians. I'm not talking about. I'm talking about the people left behind.
The minimal devastation.
The minimal devastation.
Does that match that verse in the Bible where it says they'll be taken out of the way, and then the one who causes perdition will be revealed? Like that kind of thing. That verse come in there.
Yeah. So,
thank you for that quick explanation on that whole thing, because to just throw a date out there for some.
All right, well,
Okay.
now you all know when I think the rapture's going to be. But here, there, in the air.
For our YouTube viewers as well, I wanted that.
I forgot that. So anyhow, lo and behold, the 70th week of Daniel begins in that new cycle. And what do we find happening? The solar eclipse. The head of the biblical New Year, the Passover eclipse, another solar eclipse, another head of the civil year, and then a tabernacles, another lunar. The blood moon tetrads that always what would we say? Portend war for Israel. What war is this going to be? The war of Ezekiel 38. The war that's going to turn the Jews back to their God, into their old covenant with him, calling for their temple, and lo and behold, the Antichrist, who won't be revealed yet at that time, but he'll come in and he'll confirm the covenant. The covenant being the Abrahamic covenant, Jews have a right to live in the land that God gave to them, but also the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords are the original ones. It's got new names, Roadmap to Peace and all that, but it's the original Oslo Agreement. And what we were talking about, John Kerry, last week, John Kerry saying, well, we got 9 months to go until the final status is going to be all worked out and everything. That takes you right to Passover. What's going to happen on Passover? A lunar eclipse, blood moon. So everything's just coming together. Okay, and I'm not going to go down through a whole lot more because after 2015, after that cycle starts and it's the 70th week of Daniel, well, we'll see things that happen in it, but I don't want to get into that right now. So there's your timeline. If you want to take it home and study it, if you find an error, by all means, just tell me because I'm willing to adjust.
What did you say on your sheet for the Ezekiel 38? You said one of the lunar eclipses you gave. I want to write that down here.
Oh, okay. At the very start of the 70th week of Daniel,
Okay.
we expect Ezekiel 38 war to take place, which is Gog and Magog, because between now and that started that new cycle, we expect to see Psalm 83 and Isaiah 17 fulfilled. That is the setup. They have to be set up in such a way that the Ezekiel war happens, the hooks in the jaw that God is going to put in them to come into Israel and take a spoil. Take a spoil of what? All the land and territory and resources they've just gained by knocking down the Palestinians, and Damascus will be a heap of ruins.
Yeah.
We see the Syrian war. We see the same thing happening in Egypt right now as what's happening in Syria. There's in Isaiah 19, there's a prophecy again. God has a prophecy against Egypt, and it says you'll be like schoolgirls. If you read one of the more liberal translations, you'll be like schoolgirls screaming when you see this happen. And it's a civil war. I will cause Egyptian to fight Egyptian, city to fight city, kingdom to. It's a whole prophecy against Israel or against Egypt. The only thing is, it's also in there, and Israel, your cities will be ruined too. So Israel's not going to escape from this. They're going to stand. They'll never go away. And God will come in Ezekiel and fight for them supernaturally, which that makes them realize God did this. God delivered us. We got the victory because of God. We're going to turn back to God again. This is just another cycle of their turning away and coming back, and every time God punished them in the same way. He took them out of the land. But now they're reestablished in the land for the second time, and he said, you're not going to be uprooted ever again. Ever again. Okay, enough on the timeline now. I want to get to, the Bible predicted the date of Christ's birth. Mathematically.
Oh, that's cool.
I got 3 mathematical equations. One is the predicted date of Christ's birth, Christ's presentation, and the date Israel came into the land. Which one do you want to hear first? I'll start with Christ's birth. And I'm going to go real fast. Have you ever wondered why the Magi were called wise men? Actually, they were of the pagan, Medo-Persian, or Iranian, religious order of Zoroaster. The Magi were ancient interpreters of dreams and were astrologers. Did you ever read your horoscope? Enchanters, sorcerers, and magicians. So how did these Magi recognize the prophetic time? How did these wise men of the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar come to the point where they believed in a specific timetable for the appearance of the Jewish Christ, Jesus? How did they come to see the significance of following the Star of Bethlehem, which we said last Saturday just came out from behind the sun? It's traveling through, and it's going to arrive with binoculars. You'll be able to see it with binoculars in certain parts of the world on Hanukkah. The conception day of Jesus, the light of the world, the light coming into the world.
Feast of Lights. Feast of Lights.
So, well, the king kept these magi in his court to give him advice and to interpret dreams. but the fact was they held the prophet Daniel in high esteem because he had saved the lives of the Magi in Daniel's day. King Nebuchadnezzar had a horrifying dream that sent to him from God, a dream he could neither remember the details nor what it meant. The king gathered together all his wise men, including Daniel, and demanded that they tell him what the dream was and what it meant. He threatened all the wise men, the Magi, with death if they couldn't tell him what he dreamed and what it meant. As the king's soldiers were rounding up all the wise men to put him to death, Daniel asked for a one-day extension. That night, after much prayer from Daniel and his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, which were their Hebrew names, but we know them as the Babylonian given names of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that God would reveal the dream to Daniel. God did, and King Nebuchadnezzar spared the lives of Daniel and his three friends and all the Magi. From that moment on, the Magi revered Daniel and his God-given insights greatly. They did not become believers in God as the only God of the universe. Rather, and remember our unknown God? Rather, they believed him to be the most powerful God of that time period, and certainly very powerful during any age. They still remained polytheist. Remember we talked about the unknown God? To the pagans, the unknown God was the powerful, supreme God over all the other gods of the day, yet they knew not who he was. But they knew all of Daniel's writings and undoubtedly had copies of the book of Daniel, and they knew the prophecy of Daniel 9:24-27. At the time of the appearance of the star, they knew they were within a lifetime of this prophecy coming to pass. When they saw the star of Bethlehem, which now August 10th reappeared as a sign to us, their knowledge of this remarkably precise and mathematical prophecy, plus the promptings of the Holy Spirit, caused them to embark on the journey to Israel to pay their homage to the Jewish Messiah, King, who was foretold to come at a precise, appointed time. The prophecy concerning the timing of the coming of Christ was given in an unbelievable detail 600 years before Jesus was born. You'll see that God foretold to the exact day when the Jews would officially present their long-awaited Messiah on Palm Sunday, April 6, 32 AD. It was fulfilled to the letter found in Matthew 21, but I'm not going to take the time to read that because it's a long thing. It was because of God's unparalleled mathematical prophecy found in Daniel 9:24-26. It's the 70 weeks of years, or 490 years, 70 weeks of years, are decreed upon your people in your holy city, Jerusalem. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you understand that's when Daniel was given the 7 years, the 1 week, the 62 weeks, equaling 69 weeks, and then one to go, the 70th week. And it said, well, I should read it because it tells it. Okay. From the going forth of the commandment to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the coming of the Anointed One shall be 7 weeks of years and 62 weeks of years. That's 69 weeks. It shall be built again with city, square, and moat, but in troublous times. And after the 62 weeks of years shall the Anointed One be cut off, and shall have nothing and no one belonging to and defending him. That meant that Israel could not miss the Messiah. All they had to do was be aware of this prophecy and to count the weeks of years and to be cognizant of current events in Israel as they unfolded. Isn't this the same thing we're doing right now in these last days? Trying to be cognizant of the signs and current events as they unfold, so as not to be overtaken with what's happening, and so as to understand what God's doing, which then points to what time it is on the timeline. So at the precise point in history when the 7 plus 62 weeks of years occurred, Israel could expect Messiah to announce himself as the Messiah. But the Jewish people missed the fact that the weeks of years had come to completion at the time of Jesus' birth and ministry. They did not notice that there were exactly 69 weeks of years, or 173,880 days, between the decree of King Artaxerxes in 445 BC to rebuild Jerusalem until Palm Sunday, April 6, 32 AD. But God had wonderfully foretold to Daniel the exact day on which the Messiah was to announce himself as king. I don't have an overhead, so I just did this. March 14th, 445 BC, the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. If you take the minus the 49 years, you're at 396 BC. Sometime after those 49 years, Israel could expect their Messiah. This is not referring to his birth. This is referring to his presentation as Messiah. So we're not talking about the day he was born. We're talking about the day he came into Jerusalem on the back of the colt as prophesied, and they hailed him as the King of the Jews. If we take the 69 weeks, because he was cut off after the 69 weeks. The 69 weeks are the first 7 weeks, which are the 49 years, from 445 to 96? 396. It's 69 weeks, or 483 years, or 173,880 days. How do we get that? You know how many times I rewrote this so I got it right? Okay, you have 360 days in a Hebrew year. There's 483 years in 69 weeks. There's the math. That's how I got the 173,880 days from the decree to rebuild till Palm Sunday. It's hard to keep it straight, that's...
Wow, I can see why.
Okay, now. So you have March 14th, 445 BC. Make sure I got the right one. Which is 477 years. To April 6th, Palm Sunday, April 6th, plus 24 days, because the difference in here, not counting years, just days, is 24 days. But 1 BC to 1 AD is 1 year, not 2. So it becomes 476 years and 24 days. Now we have to convert it to our calendar, because that was a 360-day Hebrew year. So we take, just look at this part first. So we take 476 years times 365 days. Now we have 173,740 days. We take that, we add the 24 days between March 14th and April 6th. Then we have to take 119 leap year days, because there were 476 years divided by 4 is 119 days you have to add on. So now we're up to 173,883 days, which is not the same as this 173,880. We're more. There's an adjustment to make. According to the London time, whatever you call it, there's a 1 and 128th minute, I think it was, difference in the time. So if you take that 128th times 476, it comes out to 3 days. So you have to subtract it, because that day is longer. So when you subtract it, what do you have? 173,880 days.
need to copy that.
That is unbelievable.
Wow.
Yeah, that is so
Exactly.
deep.
Exactly 69 weeks from Artax's degree on March 14, 445 BC, to Palm Sunday, Messiah's presentation on April 6, 32 AD, to the day.
That is just,
That's incredible.
that's unbelievable.
They probably had people then running around saying, you don't know the day or the time.
To do that,
Well, you gotta really want to seek it. I mean, you gotta be seeking it.
I did it like 100 times before it came up. Okay, so, at the precise point, to the exact day, from Artaxerxes' decree to Palm Sunday when Jesus rode into Jerusalem as the King of Kings by the crowds, was exactly 7 plus 62 weeks of years. The Jews missed it. The learned Magi knew of Daniel's prophecy and of his reputation. They believed it. Just prior to Jesus' birth, the Magi had to have been buzzing with anticipation because they knew they were living within the lifetime, approximately 30 to 40 years, of the completion of that specified time period. Thus, the Magi were looking for a sign. The Holy Spirit was also not leaving anything to chance and was prompting their minds to anticipation, to a proper understanding of what they were about to observe in the heavens, like we're striving to do right now. Even the gifts which the Magi brought to Jesus suggest they were being prompted by Daniel's prophecy. What were they? Gold. Daniel said in 9:25 the coming of the Messiah was to be a prince. This term denotes royalty. Gold was the perfect gift for a king. Frankincense. God stipulated in Exodus 30 that frankincense was to be prepared for the purpose of accompanying a sacrifice. Jesus was killed on Calvary as the perfect sacrifice, which would be acceptable to God, to take away the sins of all who would accept it. Did Daniel's prophecy reveal this sacrificial aspect? Yes. In 9:26, God revealed the Messiah would be cut off or sacrificially killed. Interestingly, frankincense was also used by the priests during the regular service in the temple. Therefore, this frankincense gift, prophetically speaking, could also point to Jesus Christ as our ultimate high priest, an office which he assumed after his ascension into heaven. And myrrh. The Jews used myrrh for embalming. It is extremely interesting that 2 of the 3 gifts which the Magi presented to baby Jesus, he wasn't a baby though, related to his death and burial. The Daniel prophecy contained all the information which the Magi needed to know to bring these gifts. They studied this prophecy in its entirety and knew exactly what kind of gifts to bring. So why did Israel's spiritual leaders miss this prophecy? And this is important. When the pagan Magi did not? The answer is simple. Simply, they didn't just forget to count the days and the years. 1, they taught that the sacred scriptures could not be taken literally because they were not totally inspired by God and thus contained errors. Does that happen today? 2, they taught that the prophecies were not to be taken literally but spiritually. I made that mistake. When I said, oh, there's not going to be a rebuilt temple, we're the temple of the Holy Spirit. And when it talks about ending the sacrifice, we're the living sacrifices, and if we're killed, then, you know, I spiritualized everything. And it was wrong. That was back in the day. So prophetic books such as Daniel were not even being taught anymore because they contained so much prophecy. So after several generations of not believing, therefore not teaching the nonsense, spiritual leaders of Jesus' day were completely unaware of this prophecy. Thus, they were unaware of the time of their visitation, just as Jesus said. The same wrong teaching concerning inspiration of the Bible and its inerrancy is occurring today. Most people are unaware that the 300 plus prophecies concerning Jesus' second coming are coming to pass or have already occurred. These people are unaware, simply and ignorantly unaware, And you ever hear of ignorance is bliss? I don't think so. Because many of these unaware people will miss Jesus' second visitation to their peril. So that's the prophecy, mathematical prophecy of that. Then prophecies by, all right, the Bible predicted the date of Israel's return, May 1948, the date hidden in the prophecies.